Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the channel. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. My name is Adam with LAHC, Leaders Advancing and Helping Communities, and this is part 2 of our 10-week Bachman Life Skills Winter Series. And this series is virtual, so you can find these videos on the page over here. Today's lesson is going to be on self-image and self-improvement. Now, before we get started, I feel it's important to note that self-image and body image are not the same. Even though our self-image can affect our body image doesn't necessarily affect our self-image like we think it does. So just wanted to get that out of the way. And then we'll be talking about self-improvement, and so ways that we can improve our self-image if we feel like we might have a low self-esteem, or we feel like we don't have a lot that we can accomplish or a lot that we can do. Of course, usually these thoughts are false, and so we'll work through kind of how to improve those through the lesson. Now, starting off, I would like for you to take a moment, and I want you to think of yourself in these 4 different settings. So use some adjectives to describe yourself when you're around your friends, when you're at home, when you're at school, and in general. And so I'll go ahead and actually work through this with you guys as well. And so first, we want to think of ourselves with our friends. And so this would kind of be a reflection of what our friends tell us about ourselves. And so I actually asked my friends to use a couple adjectives to describe me prior to this presentation. And so some of them that they suggested were things like funny, caring, and honest, which I think kind of checks out. Then we talk about, or we want to think about how we are at home. And so what do our parents say, or how do we generally feel we act when we're at home? And so using adjectives for myself, I use tidy because I'm relatively organized and clean. Inventive, I like to create, whether it's art, music, or whether it's building something. And sleepy, I'm almost always tired at home. And so those are the adjectives I'd use for that setting. Now, when we're at school, we kind of have to be a little bit different. We have some expectations and some guidelines that we have to follow, and so our adjectives might be a little bit more reserved or conservative. So things like, being smart or creative, or in some cases lazy, as I was in high school. And this is kind of, you would figure this out based on what your teachers would tell you, or what your coach would say, or what the principal would say. And now when we think of ourselves in a general setting, we kind of take the other 3 settings and we mash them up together and come up with an idea of how we are generally around people. And so I would say that I'm pretty funny around people. I'm a self-described funny person. I try to be as caring as I can be, and I would say I'm pretty smart for the average person. So those are my adjectives. These are kind of ways that I feel about myself, and although some of them aren't that positive, being sleepy and lazy, these are also generally things that I can work on improving. But for the most part, as you can see, I generally have a positive self-image or a higher self-esteem. And so what is self-image exactly? Self-image is basically how we see ourselves as a person, and essentially it's the beliefs or attitudes we have towards ourselves. I didn't always have a high self-image, but I did work on improving myself in order to develop a higher self-image. Now, Our behaviors and our values and our standards, these all kind of clump into our idea of ourself. Basically, it affects how we interact with the world, with our friends and our family, and how we talk to ourselves. Now, as I said before, self-image does not mean body image. Self-image can be impacted by other people's opinions of us, like we discussed in the previous activity. Our friends kind of define our self-image when we're around them because they tell us these things about ourselves. Same with our family members, and same with people that we work with or go to school with. But also, our past experiences have a huge impact on our self-image. As we grow, as we mature, and we make more positive changes and we start to better ourselves, our self-image will start to change with that. And so we can essentially improve our self-image over time. But it does take work. There's this thing called self-fulfilling prophecy, or a self-imposed prophecy. And this is essentially the idea that if you believe something, you'll kind of act in a way that reflects that belief, and then you end up getting a result based on that belief. And so if you're expecting something to happen, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it'll probably end up coming true because you start acting in a way that's in line with that expectation. So you kind of have this belief about yourself, and then that's going to influence, what you expect is going to happen in a situation. And then that's going to, of course, affect your behavior towards that, or how you react to it. And then that's going to influence some kind of result. And based on the result, that might reinforce or change your belief about yourself. And so let's assume, for example, I have a presentation that I think is not going to go well. And so I'll procrastinate and decide, I'm not going to prepare that much because there's really no point if I think I'm going to do poorly. And so the belief is that I'm not good at presentations. And so that's going to influence my expectation for this presentation that, I'm probably not going to do that well. And so I won't prepare enough. Obviously, that's the influence on my behavior because I don't end up preparing enough for the presentation. And naturally, as a result, I'll end up doing poorly on the presentation, and that will reinforce this belief or this idea that I'm not good at doing presentations. So essentially, we're manifesting, or we're making it come true when we have this expectation, because a lot of times we'll respond based on that. So what does a healthy self-image entail? So healthy self-image involves being very honest with ourselves, seeing ourselves honestly, and obviously not ignoring our flaws and weaknesses. So if we go back to this, if I think my presentation is not going to go well because I haven't done well with presentations in the past, instead of having the belief influence that expectation that I'm not going to do well, I can have that belief that, I don't do well in presentations, but I expect if I practice enough and if I prepare enough for this presentation, I will probably do good at it. And so that's the influence on my behavior, is that I'll practice instead of procrastinating. I'll actually work hard to make sure that I do well on the presentation. And chances are the result of that would be that I would actually do well on the presentation. So what that's going to do is, instead of reinforcing the belief that I don't do well on presentations, it's going to change that to, I could do well on presentations if I prepare. And so obviously you don't want to ignore your setbacks, but you also don't want to dwell on them. You want to love and accept yourself despite these flaws or weaknesses, and to continue working on yourself in order to kind of address these. It's important to recognize that no one is perfect, and there's a saying that practice makes perfect, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I think practice makes progress, because perfection is very unrealistic, and a lot of times we have a negative self-image because we strive for perfection when it's just not reachable. But progress is, getting better at something is. If someone has a positive self-image, they generally feel better about themselves, they're more confident, and it shows in their personality, it shows in the way they interact with the world. And this is going to help them manifest a lot more success. Whereas if somebody's dwelling on these negative ideas of themselves or this negative self-image, they're kind of going to be stuck in this cycle of, oh, I believe that I'm not going to do good, and so I expect I won't do good this time, and so I'm not going to really do anything about it, and the result is going to be I'm not doing good. But if I have this belief, oh, I usually don't do good at this thing, but I expect myself to do better if I study, if I practice, if I work on it. Obviously that's the changed behavior, is actually studying and practicing and working on it, and then you get a positive result out of that. And so a couple examples to really take the point home. Ali thinks he's not a great public speaker, and so that's him being honest with himself. So instead of dwelling on, oh, I'm not a good public speaker, he instead volunteers to speak up for his group during a presentation, so he can give himself that practice, so he can get better at being a public speaker. And over time, with practice, he can get to that point where he becomes a great public speaker. A separate example, Katie knows that she's not very good at algebra, but instead of saying, okay, I just won't try, she puts in extra work on the weekends doing practice problems and studying and working to get better, and eventually gets better at algebra. So how do we address our failures? First, you want to think about some of the mistakes you've made, some of the obstacles that you have faced, and like I said, you want to be completely honest with yourself. Think to yourself, is this mistake something that I could have avoided? Or is this obstacle something that I could have avoided? Is this something I can improve? And if so, how can I improve this? And you also have to be willing to put in the steps to improve this thing. Goes back to honesty. Being honest with yourself is going to be the biggest way in which you can make sure you're constantly improving. Now, being honest with ourselves doesn't feel good because we don't want to tell ourselves we're not good at this or we're not good at that, but we can always fix that. We can always amend that by being honest and saying, okay, this is something I'm not good at. I want to get better at it. And what are the steps I can take to get better? This is going to help you accurately know what is wrong, and you can accurately address it or work on it. And over time, you'll start to improve and you will start to feel better about yourself. And so your self-esteem, your self-image is starting to get better. It is going to take work. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of hard work. But eventually, in the end, it is worth it because you develop a skill, you get better at something you thought you weren't good at, and that boosts your confidence and tells you that you can accomplish anything you set your mind to. So what are some examples of taking a failure or a setback and turning it into a positive? Let's say you're in a class and you're not doing very well. For me, it was math. And so you fail a class, and in some cases, you might think, oh, it's the end of the world. I'm not good at this class. I can't do anything. And you want to get rid of that. You, instead of moping or dwelling on it, think to yourself, okay, I did bad in this class. I'm going to study hard. I'm going to take the class again. And this time, I'm going to pass. Don't try to set an unrealistic expectation of, oh, I'm going to get an A in this class. If you failed it, chances are it's going to be very, very difficult to get an A. But it's very, very doable to actually pass the class. You would just have to put that work in, obviously. Let's say you interview for a job that you really like, but they send you that declining letter telling you that you didn't quite make the cut. And I see this happen a lot where people they'll apply to jobs and they'll keep getting rejection letter after rejection letter. And the easy thing to do is to say, oh, well, none of these jobs want to hire me, and so I might as well not even try. But in reality, the not so easy, but the better alternative is, if you don't get hired for a job, continue applying. It doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. It just means maybe there's something with how you're interviewing. So really think about, what am I doing in the interview process that is wrong? Or what am I doing in the application process that is wrong? And try to see if there's ways to improve that. The internet has numerous resources on how to interview properly and how to prepare for interview questions. And so using the internet as your kind of database, your knowledge base for how can I improve on things. There's multiple resources for many different self-improvement tips. Let's say you fall asleep in a class because you're not getting enough sleep. And as a result, you don't get the study material that you need to know, and you end up failing a test. This doesn't mean that you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're stupid in the class. It just means that you need to get more sleep. Because what happens is, if you get enough sleep, first, you're not falling asleep in class. And secondly, your brain is getting more energy because it's more awake. You're able to sleep enough. And so you can take that test and you're better able to focus so long as you're getting that better sleep. And so that would kind of address the root cause of falling asleep in class and failing the test. Let's say you try out for a sports team and you don't quite make it. There's always, with all of these, you want to be honest with yourself and think about, what exactly was holding me back? And if once you figure that out, you figure out, okay, how can I work on that? Or if I can't, if it's something that I can't really do, like for example, I can't swim, and so obviously I wouldn't be trying out for the swim team anymore. I would try out for a different team. And so there's always different options, and there's never really any benefit to dwelling on feeling like you failed or feeling like you fell short of something, because that's not going to help you feel better about yourself. It's just going to sting a lot more. So self-improvement can be accomplished, but there are some things that you need to keep in mind. That making any kind of goal, if you have a really big, unrealistic goal and you haven't planned through how you're going to achieve that, it's going to make it harder for you to improve that thing, and you'll probably end up feeling worse if you fail again. And so one of my favorite models for setting goals is the SMART model. And the SMART model is an acronym for, that means each letter in the word stands for something. And this is going to help you specify exactly what it is that you're trying to improve, and it's going to give you the steps for how to improve it. So the first letter, the S, stands for specific. You want to be specific about what exactly it is that's holding you back and what exactly you want to do to kind of overcome that. Then you want your goal to be measurable. So how can you track your progress? How can you know that you're doing better or you're getting closer to that goal? Then the A stands for attainable. Is this goal realistic to you? Are you able to accomplish it given your skill sets or given what you already know? If you work hard towards it, basically, are you going to be able to accomplish it? The R stands for two things. You want the goal to be realistic and you want it to be relevant to you. And so this kind of goes hand in hand with attainable. And lastly, there has to be some kind of time frame that you can set for your goal so that you're not kind of pushing it off or procrastinating, and you're also not rushing yourself. And so you want to make sure that you set a manageable time frame for yourself so that you can accomplish this goal without getting off track or without rushing it and ending up not doing as well as you thought you could. A couple more tips for self-improvement. Things like taking everything at your own pace, slowing down and taking things one step at a time. I feel like in today's society, there's a lot of emphasis on getting things done quickly and rushing through things and going from here to here. And it's, take a step back, take a couple deep breaths, and know that there's no rush for anything. Try not to compare yourself to anybody else. Only compare yourself to the person you were yesterday, because you want to improve. You want to be better than who you were yesterday. But you never want to have the mindset of, I want to be better than this person or better than that person, because if you compare yourself to someone else, that's kind of going to set you up for failure, because you're not that person and you haven't had their experiences. You've had your experiences, and your growth is going to go in hand with your experiences and how well you can go, how your pace is. Make sure you're surrounding yourself with people who support you. And you never want to worry about what others say, whether it's somebody criticizing you for something that you didn't do right, or somebody telling you you're never going to be able to do this, you're never going to be able to do that. And in fact, I think the best response to that is to prove that person wrong and say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to try to do this and I'm going to do well at it because you told me I can't do it. And if you're surrounding yourself with supportive people, guess what? They're going to help you. They're going to support you along the way. Make sure that you're being honest and supportive and kind, not just towards others. Obviously, that's a given, but you want to be honest, supportive, and kind towards yourself as well. And remember to give yourself credit for the things that you are able to do. And always remember how much progress you're making. Never dwell on setbacks. So to go ahead and wrap up for today's lesson, every single one of us has our strengths and every single one of us has our weaknesses. There is no such thing as perfection. There's just certain people who are better at certain things, and you might have a skill that you do very well, and you could be better than other people. But you don't want to compare yourself to other people, because then you get overly confident and you end up kind of messing yourself up. And so you want to make sure you're avoiding comparing yourself to other people, and also remembering that nobody's perfect, and perfection is really not achievable. Our weaknesses, our imperfections can either be something we dwell on that'll diminish or make our self-esteem lower, or it can be something that guides us towards improving our qualities. And so if we have some weaknesses that give us negative qualities, we work towards improving those. And we can also appreciate some of our better qualities, really by knowing what we're not good at and what we are good at, and kind of appreciating what we are good at and working on what we're not good at, obviously. Keep striving for positive self-image and try not to dwell on the negatives. I know I've said it multiple times in the presentation, but when we end up dwelling on that negativity, we fall into bad habits, we fall into bad behaviors, because a negative self-image tells us that we can't accomplish much, and so there's no point. But there is a point, and there is so much that you can accomplish. And lastly, use these negative experiences and setbacks as a learning kind of curve, a learning experience. Everything, whether it's positive or negative, is going to present an opportunity for us to improve ourselves. And so make sure that you keep all of this in mind. And I want to thank you for tuning in today. Make sure you tune in next week for our next lesson for the Botvin Life Skills Winter Series. And until then, I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you for sticking around with me, and have a great day.